Exploring theology, doctrine, and all of the fascinating subjects in between, broadcasting from an undisclosed location, Dead Men Walking starts
now.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dead Men Walking podcast. Not the greatest to take a sip of Coke Zero right there when you're supposed to be doing the intro. Got something caught in my throat there. But guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for coming along on the ride. Thanks for sharing with a friend, commenting, and visiting DMWpodcast.com, where you can find out more about us and check out our snarky t-shirts. The DeSantis Askell 2024 shirts are selling very well. A lot of people in Florida purchasing those did it as a joke, but I think most of his family down there is grabbing those. But check it out. We got all kinds of different stuff. James White getting real in the fifth wheel, because he's out there touring, and he's going to be on pretty soon. I just reached out to him last night, and we're going to talk about nothing to do with theology. We're just going to talk about camping. He's in his fifth wheel. I've got a travel trailer. So you guys are going to have a whole episode of where we ask James White nothing theological, and we just talk about camping, which we might find enjoyable. So, but let's get right into it. Usually I chatter for a little bit, but I've got a really fun guest. He's the pastor of Grace Reformed Baptist Church in Elgin, Oklahoma, married for 20 years, father of 6 children, executive producer of A Storm Comes Rolling Down the Plain, VP of RescueThose.com, author of Loving Your IVF Neighbor, and just released the hit country song, Gooder Than Transing Kids. It's Pastor Dusty Deevers. How are you, Dusty?
Hey, I'm doing great. You had to drop that in.
Had to. It was a little viral sensation there. I saw it on my Twitter feed a few weeks ago.
That's about the best thing I've done other than getting married and having kids.
Is that gooder than trans? And obviously anything we talk about here, as always, guys, we'll link up in the episode, both on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast, so you can reference what we're talking about. But Dusty, we're just meeting for the first time. I followed you on social media. I think we have some friends in circles that are kind of in common. I had a gentleman on, Michael Harding, a few months ago. He's with End Abortion Ohio, now down in Florida at Tom Askell's church, helped him move down there. And he goes, "You got to have Dusty on." And I said, I do. And I reached out, and you were very kind and gracious with your time. And here's what we want to talk about today. The SBC, the convention just happened. If you're listening to this, the day this comes out, it's just a few days ago, earlier last week. And I'm Reformed Presbyterian, as we were talking about offline. And I even had a lot of people in my church go, "What's going on with that?" Because we just went through a thing in our church with the whole revoice and the PCA and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not comparing the two, but had a denominational issue essentially. And I've been following it from afar, not a member of the SBC, but definitely lots of friends in the SBC, lots of guests that have been on the show, the Joel Webbins and such, and the James Whites and things like that. Well, I don't think he is, but or maybe he is. But I wanted to get your take on it. You were there, correct?
Yep. Well, I got there on Sunday and left on Thursday morning, and the convention was Tuesday and Wednesday. Yep.
So from someone who might not be inside on I hate to say church politics, but I guess the politics of denominationalism, the big thing that a lot of us took away, and, I was actually camping in northern Michigan when I got the text that said the whole Rick Warren Saddleback issue had been, basically shot down or defeated, or I don't know how you would word it, but essentially saying we're going to, what's the term? Disassociate? Disfellowship. Okay. And my wife and I looked at each other and we were kind of surprised. We went, we thought he was going to get his way. So I wanted your insight on that a little bit, because I've been watching some Rick Warren clips going up to that, and full disclosure, since 2004, I've been a pretty outspoken critic of Mr. Warren. So there's no love lost there. I'm respectful, but at the same time have very many disagreements with him. It looked like to me like he almost shot himself in the foot with some of these videos. I trained 1 million pastors and you won't know what to do without us if we leave. And it kind of felt like if he would have just kept his mouth shut, it would have been a closer vote. But what happened there? It was an overwhelming vote, and it went pretty, some would say conservative. I would say it went biblical. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. Last year, whenever Rick Warren was presented, well, I've got he was given 8 minutes of time to talk. I think it was around 8 minutes to talk from the floor, and it might have been 5. I'm not certain, but he just gushed about himself. And I think he set a tone for Southern Baptist that I think was opposite of what he expected. He does have big numbers, and he has a stained glass window that's dedicated to him at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in their new chapel. The guy is a known commodity around Southern Baptist Convention. He graduated from Southwestern. And so coming into this year, he approached this disfellowshipping like nobody else has. He didn't approach it like Fern Creek did. The lady had been pastoring for 30 years at her church in Louisville, Kentucky, right near Southern Seminary, and she hadn't been called on or disfellowship in the past 30 years. The SBC hasn't changed since the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 was written. And even before that, women pastors have not been a thing in the SBC, at least on paper. But clearly, in practice, there are, if you take Rick Warren's numbers, around 1,900 female pastors who are on staff in SBC churches. And then Mike Law and his team put together a list of about 1,800 plus women, if they quantify them out. So it is a thing. But Rick Warren came this year, and he wrote articles, he released videos leading up to, he sent out email blasts, several of them. Somehow he got the full list of Southern Baptist members and maybe just pastors. I don't know for sure, but he got a list, and a whole lot of Southern Baptists were getting emails from him. So he was very much on the offensive. It was a very radical approach. So I think he shot himself in the foot last year. People kind of got a bad taste in their mouth, but I think he could have overcome some of that. But this year, whenever he went pretty hard and direct at his agenda, and then at the annual meeting on Tuesday, he had people on the ground handing out literature to Southern Baptists. And between a few of us who have been talking about this, we do not think that Rick Warren was actually attempting to persuade the Southern Baptists to bring him back. We think all along the way, since he ordained those 3 women to be pastors, May 6th, 2021. And then in 2022, June 2nd, last year, just before the annual meeting, he named Andy and Stacy Wood. Stacy is Andy's wife. They're former NAM, North American Mission Board church planters. He named them as his successors. And then May 7th of this year, he installed a lady named Katie Edwards as a campus pastor. So he has been just gradually trying to push this issue to the forefront. And he released his letter saying, look, I got it all wrong. And then he comes to the floor. And I think, along with Jeff Wright and a few other guys, that his approach was more like the Jerry Maguire approach. I'm leaving. Who's coming with me? And he was trying to take everybody he could.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm an outsider in this. And so for years I've been I'll talk to my SBC friends and pastors and things. And, whatever it was, 5, 8 or 10 years ago, they were saying, oh, there's the Calvinists have taken over the SBC. And then it was, oh, they're conservatives have taken over. And it always seems to be that I would say the more biblical, astute and biblical doctrine, I don't even want to say minority because I don't know what the numbers are. It seems like they're always getting attacked just for standing on your confession and standing on biblical principle. And so what do you think Rick was trying to accomplish here? Was he trying to be a martyr for this and say, I'm going to push? Because it didn't seem like he wanted to stay. He wanted everyone else to change their mind and look at, I did this thing and kind of created something, a new standards, so to speak, within the SBC. And it was a resounding no by the members. So I know you can't speak to his mind, but I'm just looking at his track record going, it just felt very, very odd time and overly, like you said, kind of radical and in your face and harsh.
Yeah. Since 2000, I guess it was in the late 90s when he wrote A Purpose Driven Church. Rick Warren has been a scripture tamperer, and he has stuck his finger in the wind, and then let his ears be. He has amassed a people for himself that have wanted their ears tickled. So he tampers with scripture and he tickles ears. And that's what the purpose-driven church was. It was more about marketing the church, marketing some expression, but not biblical Christianity. It was Rick's cultural version of Christianity that he wanted. The gospel was not at the center. Sound doctrine was not at the center. So he's been doing this for a long time. But I think what he has done is he stuck his finger up in the wind, and the prevailing winds have been much more egalitarian. And so I think he thinks he's sitting on top of a power structure of a bunch of really women who are going to elevate him to the top. And that is going to be his calling card. I would not at all be surprised if he starts a new denomination or something like the Saddleback network. He's got enough churches. He could go ahead and do that. Functionally, they probably already anyway. But what you saw at the annual meeting was he lost 88% of the vote. They voted against him. And what that tells you is that the SBC is conservative.
Yeah.
You've got a statement that bold. Not only did Saddleback get voted 88%, but Fern Creek was the one with the woman pastor for 30 years. She was voted against,
like 90s, wasn't it? Like 92 or 90. Yeah, 93%.
Yeah. So clearly the SBC is conservative, but there's kind of two stories that are coming out of it. The people in the pews and on the ground and in a lot of these smaller churches that are somewhat disconnected from the SBC, they're very conservative. But I think you've got some of the platform folks who are also have their finger up to the prevailing winds and saying, look, we need to do something to present a softer SBC that's more palatable to the sensibilities of the egalitarians and the woke crowd. And that's been a trajectory that we've been on for a few years now, at least from the leadership level, the platform level, not so much from folks who are in the small towns.
Yeah. So I think you bring up a great point, but wouldn't you say that's just not in the SBC? We've been seeing church culture acquiesce to secular culture now for 60, 70 years, or come right up to it and go, well, let's just soften it a little bit so we stay relevant. I would say, though, and especially the pandemic really exacerbated this. It really kind of separated those who were playing church and those who were the body of Christ, who wanted to love and glorify him, assemble together, all those biblical things. And when I see a vote of 88%, 93%, I go, oh, that's just another proof that Christians are always attracted towards biblical truth. That's why guys like you, and look, we're not going to sit here and compare platforms, and platform isn't the end all and be all, but guys like you, who people are attracted to someone who speaks the truth openly, plainly, biblically. The Rick Warrens might sell some books, but in the end, you see things implode like this because the church can't be relevant to the secular culture because everything is to bow to Christ. So we're at it also gives me hope too, to know that there's a remnant, right? Whether it's within the SBC, the PCA, within even non-denominationalism, that there are people who seek after biblical truth. And it was nice to see that in the SBC, but I think it's a larger problem of the church, the Western church in general. We've had bad doctrine, bad preaching, and wanting to be relevant, like you said, which leaves us in this predicament.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think it was funny. The pastor at Fern Creek, her name is Linda Barnes Popham. She took a few shots at folks who had closed their churches during the pandemic, and at non-Calvinists too. So I think she was trying to get some base points while also being a hardcore, progressive egalitarian. It was pretty funny. But Moeller handily struck her down, and then Moeller handily backhanded Rick Warren too. And quite frankly, Rick and Popham, they sounded very similar at the platform.
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
approach.
No, I saw both of those 3-minute speeches, the mic being cut off for Rick and Al
Mhm.
doing a very nice rebuttal representing the committee. What are your thoughts on this as a whole? So if we look at this in where the SBC is going in the future, are you happy about the vote? Not happy, indifferent, wish it wouldn't even have happened, or hopeful about the future, pessimistic about it? Where are you when you look at the SBC in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years as the largest denomination in America? I mean, for the longest time, where the SBC goes, many other denominations go that way as well. What do you think's going to happen over the next decade with the SBC?
Yeah, you're exactly right. The way the SBC goes is very important, and that's why I have decided to stay and try to fight. And there's a lot of guys I think that are wanting to fight. And let me just say this while it's fresh in my mind. For those guys who are interested in seeing if there is a plan and if there is a way to turn the SBC around towards more of that 80% who really do want to see a robust, biblical, masculine Christianity. And I don't mean there's no place for women. I mean, it's led the way God would have the families led and the church led and society led. Then reach out to me. You can get me at Dusty Deevers on Twitter. My Twitter handle is just at Dusty Deevers. But reach out to me. There is a network of us guys that are working towards a better future in the SBC. Now, there are a couple things that I think are extremely important for us to know that are telling issues for the next few years in the SBC. One of those is the Mike Law Amendment, and the second was the task force that Dr. Merritt and the other former presidents of the SBC led. And there's a major narrative there. Okay, so let me kind of set the frame for you.
Yes, please do.
There are the 80% who are just your soul to the earth Southern Baptist, and they're not egalitarian. They call themselves complementarian, but more than anything, they're biblical patriarchy. They see the roles of manhood and womanhood, and they see a place that by nature that God has created, and that our society and homes and churches will function and thrive according to God's design. That's the 80%. Now, there is a 5% or so who are egalitarian in the SBC. And then you've got maybe this 15% who are around the platform, who hear what the platform and the leadership, the elite of the SBC are saying. They've worked the system all these years, and now they've gotten to the top and they've got their positions of power. That group is looking and saying, look, we love the 80%, and this is my read on it. We love the 80%, but there's this other 5% that we don't want to lose. We want to keep the SBC big, and there's reasons for that. But you've also got these outside nefarious forces who really want to see the SBC either move hard left or collapse. Now, for them, it'd be far better if we just moved left. And you don't have to move real hard, but if you're willing to accept female pastors, well, then that slippery slope just starts gaining ground very rapidly, just like Obergefell did in the broader culture. You start allowing for women to be ordained as pastors and to violate the biblical role, and we give approval to it, then your denomination or your convention of churches is going to slide mainline. It's going to. And not only out of choice, but because God will judge. He'll put his heavy hand of judgment on that denomination. So these are the two things. I think you've got that platform looking and saying, we don't want to lose the 80, but we also don't want to lose the 5%. And so instead of them putting all their weight behind the Mike Law Amendment, and for those who
can you explain that very quick? Yeah, explain that very quickly.
So the Mike Law Amendment, last year, Mike Law, a pastor up in Virginia, made a motion to amend Article 3, Section 1 of the Southern Baptist Constitution to add an exclusion against women as pastors. And here's exactly the wording. I'm just going to read it. As offered and referred to you, exclusion 6. exclusion would read, does not affirm, appoint, or employ a woman as a pastor of any kind. So it just clarifies, and by giving an exclusion. Now, that's always been the stated position of the Southern Baptists, but clearly there are 1,800 to 1,900 women who are functioning as pastors in the SBC. So our functional practice is not in alignment with what we're saying.
Sure.
So to bring those things into alignment, that's what the law amendment was doing. He made the amendment last year. It was referred to the executive committee. The executive committee met with Mike Law in February of this year. And leading up to that, Mike had received over 2,000 signatures on his petition to bring that amendment to the floor out of the executive committee and for them to present it to the messengers to vote. But here's an interesting thing. November 2nd, last year of 2022, Executive Committee Chairman Jared Wellman and President Bart Barber released a statement, a letter affirming at least making it look like, I'm going to be as honest. I mean, not honest. I'm being honest, but as deferential to them as possible, making it look like that they were going to bring the law amendment to the floor. But finally, on Monday, before the convention, the executive committee announced that they were going to allow Mike Law's amendment or his motion to come to the messengers for a vote. But the executive committee would stand in opposition because they didn't want to change the Constitution. Instead, they wanted to see the Baptist faith and message change, but not our Constitution. Because they said it was a theological matter. Well, it's not as though your Constitution isn't both a theological and practical matter. It certainly is, and that's why the law amendment was necessary. So what you had there was really an effort to shore up our standing as biblically conservative and holding to sound doctrine on polity and leadership. Then whenever it came to the floor, the executive committee presented it. Mike Law presented his amendment, and then he argued for it. And then eventually Juan Sanchez, who is a Texas pastor and a 9 Marks guy, made a friendly amendment. He had worked with Mike Law on it to change the language to sound more positive. So instead of saying we do not affirm, appoint, or employ, it changed it to affirms, appoints, or employs only men as any kind of pastor or elder as qualified by Scripture. The motion was amended, and then people voted and had to surpass the 2/3 majority. It surpassed that, and then so what that means is next year we'll have to vote on it again and get that 2/3 majority for it to be included in the Constitution, to amend the Constitution.
So heading in the right direction.
Yes, it's very clarifying that, it might be 80 to 90 if you really count the Saddleback and the Fern Creek vote. It might be up to 90% is on our side on this issue, and against really any outside interference to try to change the Southern Baptists on this issue.
Yeah, so this is where I kind of see this parallel to politics, and we'll touch on that really quick as we finish up here. You give the 80% and the 5%, but it seems like that 5% might have a little bit louder of a yell and maybe a bigger platform, and that could be the problem too. Even though the numbers are, the 80% far outnumber the 5%. That's why I feel like sometimes it feels like an imposter kind of, because it's like, well, no, this isn't who we are as a denomination. This isn't our confession. This isn't our constitution. Yet this small number of people with maybe a larger than normal platform for whatever reason come into a denomination and go, well, no, this is the way we want it. And we think we can kind of bully it to that position. That would be very aggravating to me. The second part of that is I'm involved in politics. I'm a locally elected official, county commissioner. I go to state conventions, all that stuff. And I'll tell you what, this sounds just like when we were electing a lieutenant governor by delegate, or, I've been in very many meetings where we're using Robert's rules and all that. So that kind of frustrates me, though. What are your personal thoughts on that, where you walk into an SBC convention or or a gubernatorial convention, they almost feel the same. There's so much politics that go on within a denomination. Can we avoid that? Do we not need to avoid that? Is it just a byproduct of a group of people coming together? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Do you want to get rid of it? Not, don't care? Or is it a little, it's a little painful to have to sit through in the body of Christ?
Well, sure. I have a lot of thoughts. One, so we can talk about politics, but a lot of things get lumped into politics. You could call, leading a meeting with 15,000 people, you could call it political, whenever we really should just back up and say, well, okay, what does it look like to love your neighbor as yourself and give them time to speak to their the things that really matter on either side, and you can speak for and you can speak against. And then if there's somebody who's gotten out of line, how do you address that in a way that's kind and gentle and patient, that's loving? So I think that was the original intent with Robert's rules. But Robert's rules has to be there to manage sin too.
Sure.
You have a whole bunch of people and you have to agree on certain standing rules. Otherwise our sin is just going to take over, and I'm a sinner. Everybody else in that room's a sinner. And so we need to agree to something here. But they absolutely can be manipulated, and they can be used to favor one side or the other, depending on what's presented even for a vote, what's deferred, what's taken up, how the time is allotted, if people gerrymander time. There's all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I think what people call political is maybe not Robert's rules just in general. It's whenever you see things get ugly, they're like, oh, that's just so political. And I'm like, well, yeah, instead of it being more Christian, it is being more pragmatic and worldly. But it raises another issue. You've got, I could be wrong. It might be 90% that are for us and 5% that are more egalitarian and 5% that are in the leadership. And they're saying we've got to keep these parties, or some of them are the 5% egalitarian. But they're the ones who are actually doing things to move into positions of influence and power. And that's how it is in the with the Democrats, with the Republicans, in any body. Sure. You have often the problem being good men think that other men are going to be good and honorable, instead of saying, no, we're in a battle for promoting what is good, right, and true. And we must constantly be on, you have to have two voices, as Calvin would talk about, one to build up the sheep and to call them, and another to rebuke and to make war on the wolves. And you have to hold those constantly. You can't just think, I'm a nice person and I'm just going to build up the sheep. Well, you're not being loving and caring if you're not rebuking and going to fierce war with the wolves. And so, we've heard this played out numerous times in our society and over our history. All that really takes for evil to promulgate and to perpetuate is for good men to do little or nothing. And that's why I want to encourage men to step up in their churches, step up in their local associations, step up in your state associations, come to the annual meeting, get connected right now with folks who are actually trying to do the work. Now, you might say, I don't want to be in the SBC. It's too far gone. It's this or that. Well, imagine a world without the biggest Protestant denomination in the U.S. pushing back against darkness. Imagine what happens. Now, God might give us over to judgment, and to some degree we are in a form of judgment, but he might just go ahead and give us over and remove more restraints on us. And if he does, then I don't want to have to tell my grandkids, look, I went down without a fight. I want to be in a fight, and I want to use the scriptures to hold firm to sound doctrine, to build up the saints, and to love my neighbor by making war on those who would make war on God's word. And this is a battle that we have to just comprehend and just accept. You're going to be in it. Whether you like it or not, you're in it. And whether you fight or not, you're in it. You might acquiesce, but you're in the fight. So I know that's kind of a rant, but it's just everywhere.
I love it.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Fathers have to make war on their own sin. They have to build up their homes, and then they have to discipline their homes in the fear and admonition of the Lord. They have to go to the church and do the same, because Satan is constantly, through his minions, constantly trying to make war on the church. And he's going to make war on the world that should be taught to obey everything that Jesus commanded, because Jesus is king. So you can try to get away from it, but that just makes more work for everybody else, you know?
Yeah.
Very
well said. No, go ahead.
Well, there's one other issue that's very important that was brought out. It's not like the annual meeting this year was just smooth sailing and really the conservatives won, and we really don't have anything to deal with. You know, you and I probably need a couple, 3 hours to work through the various details on these issues. But one of the major issues was, I think, the attempt by the platform and the 5% maybe of the platform and the folks who are in leadership to keep those egalitarians and to make it still more welcoming to them was the Merit and Former President's Task Force. Now there's a fascinating history to this task force. And I think if you understand some of the internal dynamics of the SBC, you see that on one hand, we are very conservative, but you also see that people just love the leaders on the platform. If people are in charge, they generally, because Southern Baptists are generally like very kind people, the salt of the earth folks, they assume the best of everyone. They think, you know, we're doing the right thing. We've got a few things that are wrong, but largely God's blessing us. And they can point to numbers and different things like that, but they think that we're kind of like one of the last bastions, our churches are. So they love the leaders on the platform. And the reality is that whenever the platform says something, it's very hard to override them. And you've got, you know, the North American Mission Board bringing thousands of votes to the annual meeting every year. And I'm not saying that they're a rubber stamp for whatever the platform wants, but they are getting paid by the leadership, by the SBC, and they're keeping their churches afloat, and then they're paying them to come to the annual meeting. That's a whole lot of votes to overcome.
Sure.
I do think that if they were speaking for themselves, then they would say, look, we're not voting in accordance. They don't give us a vote docket to say you have to vote like this. And that's true. That I've never seen one, but the North American Mission Board voting block is a big one to overcome. Now, here's a little bit of your history on the Merit and Former President's Task Force that was made a motion this year. You know, people who are in the know are seeing that this idea of having a task force to avoid some kind of a split, as we have this law amendment in place now, and it looks like we're going very clear and direct and hard line on what we mean by who's qualified biblically to be a pastor in our churches. There's a group who has been shopping around the idea to keep that 5% and avoid a big split in the SBC. And in November, we talked about earlier, Bart Barber and Jared Wellman released a letter and a press release saying that they promised they're going to be fair with the messengers towards the law amendment. And when you hear we're going to be fair, you should take that as a sign of things to come, that maybe it's not going to be fair, you know?
Yeah.
So last year at the annual meeting, Adam Greenway presented something very, very similar to what this Merit task force was, to study what it is to cooperate within the SBC. They so Greenway presented that, and then Moeller handily swatted him down last year. Well, Bart then floats it on in a video that he released on Twitter, and then Baptist 21, a group of guys who are kind of in the upper echelon, very connected, Aiken relation, they pick it up and they start taking up this idea that we need to really understand where we are in our cooperation, taking up Al Mohler's theological triage and really just making a wreck of it. So on June 9th, mind you, the annual meeting is the 13th and 14th. So on June 9th, Clint Presley is a pastor, and he offered a motion that aimed to clarify what faithful cooperation in the Southern Baptist Convention looked like by forming a study committee to bring a report and recommendations. This is the exact same thing that Adam Greenway did last year, that Bart Barber had talked about, that Baptist 21 got behind, and then Clint Presley picks it up. Now, for whatever reason, Clint Presley pulls it on Monday, the 12th. Okay. I don't know all the details, but it is very fishy. He pulled it on the 12th. And then on that Monday, the executive committee releases that very last minute that they are going to present the law amendment on the floor. Okay. The very last minute. So Presley pulls his task force motion. And there was a switch then made to James Merritt, J.D. Greer, Bryant Wright, Steve Gaines, and Ed Litton, former presidents. They took the very same motion and the task force, and they presented it. And in that way, they're butchering the second level of triage and what it means to partner with certain churches in your particular denomination. And they shoved it over. They're wanting, really, the idea is to shove it over into the third level, to where you can have egalitarians, you can have female pastors in your own denomination, and everybody cooperate in friendly fellowship. So this is a big issue. These secondary issues are what make us a Baptist denomination and what makes us Southern Baptists, and not tertiary. So we saw it coming, and that's when I went to the mic, and I was working with a couple guys, and the mics got shut down. We had 9 mics on the floor, and I think they test run it on the day before. The mics got shut down, and then at this very opportune time, the mics get shut down, and it moves to 2 microphones. And in God's providence, I was there at the microphone, and they called on me, and I made a motion to amend their task force to attempt to bring some accountability and greater theological acuity to that task force to water it down. I didn't think that we could defeat it because the platform is so powerful. I don't think that you can overcome the floor that quickly. So I wanted to water it down and to give Dr. Moeller an ability to be on that task force, which I think he probably was, I think he was probably initiated into what was going on. And he said, take the Baptist Faith and Message off the table, because I don't want to open up the Baptist Faith and Message to be evaluated. But if you'll take that off, then I will not make a stink of it. So we tried to get some guys to present for it. They wouldn't present. So I was at the mic and presented. So that's why it's going to open up that task force. I think is a backdoor mechanism for opening up the Baptist Faith and Message and giving that power, the committee, to tell us which parts of the Baptist Faith and Message matter and which parts don't. They're going to present their recommendations next year. And again, you've got to be able to defeat the platform. And I think that if they have their way and we don't get the votes to the SBC next year, the SBC of our grandparents could fundamentally be altered. Now, I'm not saying that these guys have bad intentions, but I think that this task force needs to be driven by trusted and tried theological leaders. And I am just deeply concerned at this move.
Yeah. So, okay. So overview here as we finish up, essentially this year looks like steps in the right direction. We feel optimistic about it, but essentially it sounds like you're saying the fight's not over because there's still some things that's going to be going on throughout the year. And if you're a member of the SBC, you're listening to this podcast, like I said, and like Pastor said, make sure you get a hold of him on social media, follow him. He knows what's going on there. And like you said, participate and vote, right? Be part of that if you're part of that, because essentially I look at it and I go, you said it correctly. The SBCs really is the last standing biblical conservative denomination. The Episcopalians have fallen, the Methodists have fallen, both Presbyterian branches. One was more conservative, and now with Revoice and all these other things are accepting all these leftist and progressive secular ideas. So I think it's very important that we watch this. It's the largest denomination, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. So why don't you tell the people what you got going on in your life, where they can, find any of your books or platforms or anything so we can support you, and we'll finish this thing out.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So Dusty Deevers on Twitter, just my name. I had a Facebook account, but it got hacked and by probably a Facebook insider, and they wrecked it, and so I couldn't get it back. But you can watch A Storm Comes Rolling Down the Plain on YouTube. That's a documentary that I did a couple of years ago, and it's really important on the move of God awakening the church to get involved in the fight for abolishing abortion. Yeah. I have a book on in vitro fertilization called Loving Your IVF Neighbor, and it's on rescuethose.com, where I'm a vice president over there. Soon, I have a book that'll come out on abortifacient birth control and abortion pills. Just trying to add a section on abortion pills right now. Hopefully it'll be out soon. There are a lot of other things in the works, but I really would like for folks who want to see, who want to kind of be involved with a bunch of guys who are solid and really having tons of fun. Some good meme warriors out there too, and wanting to see not just the SBC, but move our nation into a much more biblical position where we just vocally and clearly say Christ is Lord, and we need to govern from the Word of God, especially the Ten Commandments, and make application from there. So you can also go to statementonchristiannationalism.com. I was one of the authors of it. Hopefully we'll have information up soon about when our conference will be on. It'll be early or mid-August for that as well.
Awesome. Well, Pastor, thanks so much for taking time out. We'll let you get back to, it looks like a sunny day there, vacation, whatever it is that you're doing. I appreciate you being gracious with your time. You're always welcome back on the podcast. And we just really scratched the surface with your knowledge of the SBC stuff. I know there's all kinds of stuff that we could talk about in the future, abolition, all those things. So we'd love to have you back.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you so much for giving me your time.
Yeah. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. Ephesians 2, once dead in our trespasses, but now raised in high and priestly places with Christ. As always, you can go to dmwpodcast.com, check out more about us. And as always, remember, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. God bless. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Dead Men Walking Podcast for full video podcast episodes and clips, or email us at deadmenwalkingpodcast@gmail.com.